Hey, good morning, everybody. I think that I will get us started. My name is Liliana Bechtold. I'm from the School of Cities, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our Knowledge Cafe this afternoon on place-based and equitable climate informatics. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge first that for thousands of years, this land upon which I am on today has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, or what we settlers call North America. And we're so grateful to have the opportunity to live and work here. I really hope that our conversation today generates insights and some thoughtful reflection on how we can be better stewards of this land in the spirit of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement, an agreement on how the land can be shared to the mutual benefit of all its inhabitants. Since we're gathered here virtually today, if you're not in Toronto, I really encourage you to look into the Indigenous histories of the land that you're on and to learn about how you can participate in the stewardship and the protection of that land. So again, welcome. The School of Cities is Toronto's multidisciplinary center for urban research, education, and engagement, dedicated to discovering new ways for cities and their residents to thrive. And as part of that mission, we host the Knowledge Cafe, a monthly speaking opportunity for the tri-campus community here at U of T, and also for community members to present analysis and highlights of their research on a theme that is important and relevant to cities. So we're trying to provide a platform for faculty, students, and researchers who are working to uncover solutions to creating more just, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous cities. This year, our theme is belonging, migration, and thriving. And so throughout the year, we've had a number of expert speakers from departments across the tri-campus community. Hopefully you've gotten the chance to come to some of our past knowledge cafes. If this is your first one, hopefully you'll come to some more in the future. And you can learn more about the speakers that are coming up for the rest of the year on our website, or you can check the chat for more information. Today's session features Dr. Robert Sodin coming to us from the Toronto Climate Observatory. The TCO's mission is to reimagine how communities around the GTA understand climate change, work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and plan for impacts in place-based, equitable, and action-driven ways. So today, Dr. Sodin will be talking to us about the TCO's approach, their research into human-centered climate informatics, and some opportunities to participate in initiatives. So without further ado, I will hand it off to him. I'm so excited to hear his presentation, and I hope that everyone really enjoys it.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm super excited to get to present our work to this community today. This is actually the first time since joining U of T I really had a chance to talk about some of the new work that we've been doing in the last couple of years, and this is a great audience for what we're up to. And so today I really want to accomplish four things. The first is just to further introduce myself, my approach, and the kinds of work that I do. Second, I want to touch just quickly on maybe what we could say is the current state of climate informatics, and in particular, some of the most salient critiques of current climate services that are coming from the literature. And then most importantly, I'm going to introduce a new and still emerging entity here at the University of Toronto that has a number of different participants from a lot of different departments and all three campuses that we're calling the Toronto Climate Observatory. I'll describe some of the initial projects that we're working on together, and then tell you a bit more about where we're going and how you can get involved. Hopefully you'll find the content of the talk interesting, but I really would like you to consider it as an invitation to join us in our mission to change how we think about climate informatics and develop the next generation of climate services that is human-centered, place-based, and equitable. So as I said, I'm relatively new faculty here at U of T. I started in July 2020, kind of at the height of the pandemic. I spent most of the first 2 years of this job kind of at home in this room. And so it's really this academic year that's been the first where the majority of my teaching and a lot of my meetings have been online and in person. So I still feel like I'm kind of getting to know folks and learning my way around. My appointment's in computer science in the School of the Environment. I'm also a faculty affiliate here with the School of Cities and also the Schwartz-Reisman Institute. My research is primarily in the area of a field called human-computer interaction, or HCI. And I study the information system, so the maps, the models, the data, the algorithms that we use to understand environmental issues. Methodologically, I draw on qualitative design and participatory research methods. with the goal of informing the design, evaluation, and development of the computing and information technologies that can contribute to environmental safety, justice, and sustainability. So, as we've all heard, and as we've all seen, over the past 20 years or so, there's really been an explosion of data and information that's become available about the natural and built environment. This includes tremendous advances in satellite and remote sensing technologies, complex disaster and climate risk models that were initially developed by the insurance industry, but are now being deployed for all kinds of things in the public sphere. Urban sensing and IoT technologies that offer the potential for hyperlocal and real-time data on things like building performance, air quality, urban heat, population mobility, high resolution, high cadence imagery from drones and so-called microsatellites, citizen science, social media, and of course AI and machine learning as an attempt to process all of these information and make sense of this information in ways that perhaps weren't possible until somewhat recently. So it's really important to note that a lot of those tools I just mentioned have really just become either available at all or more widespread within just the last 20 years. So part of my job is to study these changing technologies, to understand their implications without kind of falling victim to or rebroadcasting some of the techno-optimist narratives around how technology X is going to revolutionize Y, and these kinds of somewhat exaggerated or overstated claims that I think we're all familiar with. So how do we do that? And one perspective from which we can start to understand all these things is to see them as technologies of representation. So these tools that we're talking about, they're an important part of how we make sense of the world around us. They tell us what environmental hazards are out there. They tell us about their potential or actual impacts, and they shape the narratives around what they mean to us. It's through these tools that we are able to accomplish a lot of basic sense making about environmental challenges and then determine how we want to respond to them. So one thing that we need to do then is ask about the implications of the design of these tools for how they shape what we can know about the world, our relationship to it, and ultimately, I would argue, our relationship to each other. And of course, as we know, but so often forget, data, maps, models, they're all necessarily incomplete, abstracted views of whatever it is that we're trying to represent. Representations are always incomplete, they're always imperfect. As George Box, who is one of the most important statisticians of the 20th century, said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Cartographers, who I work with a lot, have known this for a long time. Korbitsky said in 1931, famously, that the map is not the territory. But this is also coming from the arts and humanities. So Borges, Argentinian writer and poet, in his essay called On Exactitude in Science, wrote about some cartographers working in a faraway empire. And he said, in that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire, the entirety of a province. Over time, even these maps no longer satisfied, and the cartographers created a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire itself, which coincided point for point with it. However, later generations were not so fond of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that this map had become useless, and they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters, left it in the deserts of the West, where it still resides today. And in all the land, there's no other relic of the disciplines of geography. And here's an artistic rendering of what happened to that map. What happened when the cartographers forgot that the map is not the territory? They forgot that all maps of the world are necessarily incomplete, that they're abstractions. And this is in fact the reason why they are valuable. To see if these abstractions that make them work at scale at what gives them their power. But since maps, models, data about the world is incomplete, the folks that design them make choices about what to include, what not to include, which individual statistics or indicators are incorporated, how those are weighted in larger models. And crucially, we know, and this has been shown over and over and over again, that these choices have a way of embedding the perspectives, the worldviews, the biases, and the assumptions of those who make them. And this is so easy to forget. These choices about data standards, data collection methods, analysis techniques, once made, get embroiled within much broader information infrastructures or environmental systems. They start to appear not as choices at all, but in some ways obvious or inevitable, or they couldn't have been different. And so in this kind of 1929 Magritte painting of the pipe, with the caption stating, "This is not a pipe," we might often see this painting and think that the painter is being, ironic, possibly vaguely humorous, but no, the title of this painting is "The Treachery of Images." And what the painter is reminding us is the way that the representations can betray us. They trick us into believing that they're real. They trick us into believing that the map is in fact the territory. And so what is my point with all of this? So the first part of this talk is to lay out how I think about these things. And that is this. So quantification, turning the complex phenomenal world around us into data and understanding it through data is a process of abstraction. Abstraction is powerful, it is useful, but whenever we abstract, we make choices. And these choices frequently can and do reflect our values and our position within society. And once made, they've become part of much broader infrastructures and difficult to recognize as choices, let alone change or reverse. And so we, as we're thinking about how we want to produce data, maps, models of the world around us, of how climate change may be impacting us, we should be very careful, and we should try to learn to make more skillful choices. So in my own work, I've looked at things about how the binary conception of flood risk created by the 100-year floodplain, you're either kind of in the floodplain or out of it, creates a sort of problematic closure around both the popular imagination of flood danger and influences all kinds of things like land use planning and real estate markets that it wasn't initially designed for. The standard was incorporated into many government policies in the US and elsewhere in the 1960s, at a time when we know far less than we do today about floods. And in its kind of binary presentation of risk, it conveys a simplicity, and in that simplicity, a confidence that's really unwarranted in the underlying science and can and does lead to increased risk in the many places where it's relied upon. And some work on the technologies and tools that support post-disaster earthquake damage assessment. We drew on research methods such as oral histories and participatory mapping to show that some of the design decisions surrounding the collection of official government statistics about the damage caused by the 2015 earthquakes in Nepal work to silence local perspectives, priorities, and aspirations of some of the impacted communities, in turn resulting in a kind of recovery process that missed out on opportunities to account for the many and complicated ways in which that earthquake impacted people, as well as address long-standing sources of earthquake vulnerability, and really chart a path for recovery that aligned with people's hopes and visions for the future. In the San Francisco Bay Area, we worked with civil engineers, ecologists, and environmental justice activists to show that the kinds of social, technical, and institutional elements of the information infrastructure that supports sea level rise modeling in the region makes it far easier for those advocating for kind of a gray infrastructure or a heavy infrastructure engineering-led approach to managing sea level rise to collect their data, analyze their results, and argue for their particular vision of sea level rise as a certain kind of problem and the kinds of solutions that are considered, in this case, heavy gray infrastructure, so seawalls, dikes, and so on. This kind of infrastructural bias shapes the decisions that are even possible about what kind of place the San Francisco Bay Area might be in the future, and excludes the perspectives of many of the people who will be among the most impacted. And so much of my work prior to coming to U of T has tried to identify what I've been calling maladaptive design patterns, or recurring configurations of social and technical information infrastructures that lead to predictively negative social outcomes. And so you've heard me mention a few of these design patterns just now: closure, silence, bias, exclusions. By identifying and naming and describing these patterns, this gives us tools to more easily recognize them when we encounter them in the future, and to develop alternatives. Because, of course, my research isn't just about finding problems in existing tools, but also designing and evaluating new systems, working with governments and nonprofit agencies to advise on their technologies, and partnering with communities to help ensure environmental information systems can meet their needs. And so since coming to U of T, I've gotten more involved in applying these kinds of research methods, these kinds of insights, to understanding what current climate change impact models and data tell us about what Toronto and the GTA might look like over the next 30 to 50 years, and looking very specifically at what we need to know about how climate change will impact the city and the region over this period. And so when looking for authoritative information on this topic, we very quickly come across the notion of climate services. So what does that mean? According to the WMO, effective climate services will facilitate climate smart decisions that will, for example, mitigate the impacts of climate-related disasters, improve food security and health outcomes, enhance water resources management, and bring better outcomes in disaster risk reduction. Closer to home, in the Canadian Climate Services Center, they say that our goal at the CCCS is to help Canadians increase their resilience to climate change. We aim to do this by helping to improve your understanding of how the climate is changing. We also aim to help you discover how these changes may affect you and the things that are important to you. Additionally, we provide guidance and resources to help you use this knowledge for making climate smart decisions when planning for the future. And so that sounds great. Let's look at how this has been playing out in practice. So when I first moved to Toronto, I did what many other members of the interested public might do. I was thinking about climate change, started Googling climate impacts Toronto, climate data Toronto, to see what I could find. And this is one of the first sites I came across. It's called the Ontario Climate Data Portal. It has the stated goal of helping assist Ontarians with adaptation to climate change. And so here's an example of the kind of maps they show. One of the things that we can notice right away here is that this is all of Ontario, with Toronto kind of down in the bottom right-hand corner there. So the data is not really at a scale, in this case, that's necessary to support local action at the urban or the community scale. But perhaps more importantly, when we look at the range of kind of data and statistics they offer, we see a lot of things that include things like future precipitation, number of cold days, number of hot days, season length, etc. And I want to say this is all very useful data. It takes a lot of resources, work, expertise to develop, but I think clearly insufficient to helping your average Ontarian understand and prepare for how their lives may be impacted in the coming decades by climate change. And not just to pick on this one site, here's another Ontario Climate Services site, the PAVIX portal, which offers a very similar sort of range of data and information. The Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium is doing fantastic work. They're another regional climate services center out west, but they have essentially the same offerings. Here's their data portal. Again, we see environmental data largely aimed at an expert audience for use by experts with expert tools. I should shout out the Canada Climate Atlas as a group that's doing some very interesting work combining this kind of data with oral histories, Indigenous perspectives and knowledge, video documentary projects, but this is still largely happening at the national level. Overall, what we see when we look across the climate service information centers at the moment is very valuable, important, sometimes downscaled data on future climate conditions, but not the kinds of information that can by itself live up to the CCCS sort of aspirations for producing information that will help our communities understand how climate change will impact the things that are important to them and help them to decide what to do in response. And so as I started reading more and kind of looking across the literature on climate informatics, we see these kinds of critiques, but also some others that I want to highlight because they'll help give you a sense of where we want to go with the Toronto Climate Observatory. So the first is that climate change impacts are diffuse. They're affecting and will continue to affect in an accelerating way many parts of society and nature, and understanding them requires many different forms of knowledge and expertise. However, current research and data about these things is siloed by domain or by expert area. Second, climate change to me is, if anything, it is an equity and justice issue. However, most climate data that we see rarely accounts for differentiated impacts and shows how different communities will be affected disproportionately by climate impacts. Third, as we've kind of already noted, current information is often not targeted for decision makers and decision making at the community scale. Fourth, though accelerating, climate impacts are gradual rather than punctuated, and a lot of the climate impact information that we do see often focuses on extreme, comparatively rare events such as large fires, big storms, as opposed to attention to smaller, less sensational, more quotidian, or second and third order effects of climate change that arguably over the long run will have a bigger impact. And then finally, crucially, affected communities are not involved in the processes of producing or making meaning out of climate impact data, which has a way of compounding the kind of abstract and unfocused character of so much of current climate information. So to kind of bring those critiques together leads me to my next argument, which is that our cities need an expanded, more inclusive, and more actionable approach to climate services that can, in order to meet the needs of accelerating environmental change. So how do we do this? In order to tackle this question, in order to start to get our heads around this question, here at the University of Toronto, we're developing something called the Toronto Climate Observatory. And when I say we, I do truly mean we. I happen to be giving this talk, but we have several dozen faculty, graduate students, postdocs, all working together, coming together, figuring out how to approach this question and starting to develop some initial projects to that end. And so in doing our work, we've kind of come upon a number of principles, both from the academic literature, but also our own experiences, researchers on these topics, and our own values that are guiding our work. So the first is that the politics and the public imagination of climate change should be informed by real data, as well as stories that are put into local context and made meaningful. Second, adaptive local action needs to be evidence-based and center on the most impacted communities. Third is that climate understanding is continuously being co-produced between the public and the many sources of information that they have access to. And if we don't intentionally engage the public in this co-production, bad actors will continue to. Fourth is that new forms of environmental science and modeling that don't assume a stable climate will need to be developed across a range of domains and problem spaces, along with the infrastructure, the scientific practices, and to support those. And then finally, that we have a moral obligation to bear witness to climate impacts, to bear witness to how the world is changing around us, even as we work to limit those impacts. And so in the next couple of minutes, I want to talk about some of the initial projects that the Toronto Climate Observatory is working on with these principles in mind. And one of our first priorities, as you might imagine, is to better understand user needs and public needs in particular for climate information. So to do this, we have a team of 10 graduate students, faculty, and postdocs currently working on conducting various forms of qualitative and design research with a range of different user groups and communities across the GTA. And so to help align all these different individual projects, we're developing a concept that we're calling climate data practices. And our kind of working definition of climate data practices is that they are purposeful, patterned forms of action that shape the ways in which people create, encounter, use, share, and make meaning from climate data. Importantly, I think this concept helps us move past kind of naive notions of data as just being kind of a raw input into poorly defined, poorly understood decision-making processes, and instead really see data and information as the complex socio-technical objects that they are, with both material and discursive characteristics that both influence and are influenced by the infrastructures and the social context in which they're created, maintained, shared, and used. Much more concretely, we're using this concept to ask some simple questions, such as what goals are people currently trying to seek to accomplish with climate data and information? What data are they currently relying on to achieve these goals, and what data is missing? What are some of the other challenges that they face along their way? What narratives of climate change impacts do these practices enable, and which ones do they obscure? What forms of expertise are necessary to perform these activities? And who's involved in these climate data practices and who's excluded? So for example, one of our graduate students, Lily Flon, has been working with youth climate justice activists over the past 6 months or so. And she's identified a number of different data practices, such as name and shame of polluting entities. Climate justice activists also frequently engage in resource mapping to identify kind of what resources are available to them as they're planning their activities. They will often show alarming or effective climate statistics in order to galvanize public attention and encourage public action. They will often try to differentiate climate impacts in ways that highlight the inequities and justice issues around climate change. Or often they'll engage in things like citizen science or other forms of data collection that allows them to challenge official or authoritative narratives about what climate impacts might be. And we're not just working with climate justice activists, we're also looking at urban agriculture practitioners, municipal government in Toronto, recently arrived immigrants, transportation advocates, architects and planners working in building retrofits, and others. And together, by working with all of these different user groups or communities, we're hoping to produce a better understanding of this relationship between data and information, and the broader politics of climate impacts and adaptation that will inform both social science and humanities research on this critical topic, but as well produce concrete design recommendations that we can publish and we can take forward into our own work, which will be around developing the design and implementation of new sets of climate services for the region. Another project that we're working on with funding from SSHRC, but also in collaboration with Balance for Blind Adults, which is a local blind services nonprofit, and York University's emergency management, relates to how can we improve severe weather risk communication to folks with visual impairments. This builds on a 2-year study we did with the U.S. National Hurricane Center on using digital tools for hurricane risk communication, where we found that folks with sensory impairments were essentially being left out of authoritative or official weather risk communication information. And so we're now kind of engaging in a co-design or participatory design process with blind adults across Ontario on how can we design better digital tools for communicating sometimes life-saving information in the run-up to severe weather events. Another project we're working on with a variety of collaborators, including NTU Singapore, University of Michigan, and Arup, as well as some funding from UofT's Data Science Institute, is how can we better incorporate questions of equity into climate and disaster risk modeling in order to get to that question that I was mentioning earlier about differentiated or disproportionate impacts on different communities. And then finally, I want to talk quickly about the Toronto Climate Summer School, which we've just got some funding from U of T's Learning, Education, and Advancement Fund to develop and launch the Toronto Climate Summer School in summer 2024, which will be a month-long field course where undergraduate students have the opportunity to work on interdisciplinary teams with faculty supervision on research related to local climate impacts across the GTA. As a field course, we'll have things like site visits, guest lectures, and service learning opportunities with local community partners and other elements of place-based pedagogy, all with an emphasis towards both building research experience and skills in an interdisciplinary manner for our undergraduate students here at U of T, but also the development of an interdisciplinary community of practice across U of T, local government, and our community partners. And then finally, I should note that there are opportunities for graduate students to participate in this as well. And so we're still new, we're still growing. These are just some of our initial projects that we've already started working on. Some of the projects that we are either coming up in the near future or under discussion include, I'd really like to get a artist in residency program going at the Toronto Climate Observatory. Some of our students are interested in using citizen science and oral histories as kind of research methods for understanding and monitoring climate change impacts. We have some funds from the Climate Positive Energy Group here at U of T on how to incorporate equity concerns into the models around building retrofits across the region. I'm working with colleagues at the Department of Computer Science to build relationships with folks at Google, the Microsoft, some of the other big tech companies for how can some of their Earth observation and environmental information systems be usefully applied to some of our questions here in Toronto. We're trying to get funding to create a small grants program for innovative climate change impact research being conducted both across U of T, but also in our community partners in the region. And then ultimately, we're hoping to really build a model of what a local urban scale public climate observatory can look like and partner with similarly minded entities in other locations to build a global network of public climate observatories. And so there's lots of opportunities to get involved. Primarily, if this sounds interesting to you, you should join our email list. We have most months, we try to have monthly meetings that are open to anyone to join and participate and get an update on what we're up to. We are looking for mentors to support undergraduate researchers as part of the Toronto Climate Summer School next summer. We're looking for introductions and help building connections to new partners who you think we should be working with on these topics. If you're doing research or working on climate change in the region, we'd love to talk to you about your climate data practices. And then finally, we're going to announce this soon, but this summer we're going to be holding a workshop and research symposium on climate change in the GTA. It would be another opportunity to get involved and help us plan for the future. We're hiring. This is a 2-year postdoc position that's already been announced on the School of the Environment website. The link is at the bottom of the page, or you can send me an email. There's a couple positions that will be open soon. Again, I'm looking for an artist in residence. We'll also be hiring a researcher that can help us work on Indigenous climate data practices, as well as a researcher on topics related to climate and racial justice. And so I'll just close there and say that I'm really excited about the potential for the amazing faculty across U of T, our community and local government partners to develop the next generation of climate informatics that meets those aspirations of the Canadian Climate Services Centre to help our communities understand how climate change will impact the things that are important to them and take meaningful and informed action. I think we have the opportunity here to develop a model for what an urban scale public climate observatory should look like and set a good example for other places. And just want to thank all of my collaborators on that last slide and thank the School of Cities for the opportunity to present. And I do think we have some time left for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. That was so interesting. It's amazing to hear about the work that's being done, the work that's going to be done in the future. Maybe we'll just start with a question that I have from watching your presentation, because I get to pick the questions. So I'll ask, maybe if you could look at some of those climate infographics and sort of data hubs that you were showing us earlier, that there was a bit of a critique of, if you had like 3 top best practices that you wish that places that are collecting information like that would follow, or like just a handful of best practices, what do you think that those would be?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to really critique those platforms too much because they're doing largely what they were envisioned to do, which is to take sort of broader scale climate models and downscale them through a variety of techniques to make them more sort of regionally useful, regionally appropriate. And I think most of those sites do a good job of that. They offer the data for download, there's reasonable metadata behind it. And so it's hard to, what I was really trying to critique is more is that particular model, and show that there's perhaps a misalignment between what's currently being delivered and expected of those groups and the broader vision for what climate services can do, as sort of argued by the WMO and Triple CS. And so I think, some of our principles that we would like to see in a new expanded vision of climate services really relate to understanding user needs, understanding that there is a range of publics who all have a stake in climate impacts, and we need to develop more granular understandings of what youth activists want to know about climate change. What do urban agriculture practitioners need to know? What do local flood mitigation planners need to know? And how can we start to build bridges between that important data that's currently being delivered by the climate service platforms and those specific user needs of the public? So first would be to understand those user needs. Second, as I've already kind of mentioned, really focusing on the equity and justice impacts of climate change. Again, if climate change is anything, it is an equity and justice issue, yet too often our current information about climate impacts do not account for that, or even tell us what that's going to look like. And then third, find ways to involve the public in kind of the co-production of knowledge and meaning around what climate change is going to be. Right now, the kinds of statistics and suite of information that's available just feels really abstract, really far away. You kind of see these numbers and it's hard to understand what this means for me, what this means for the things that I care about and my communities. And as a result, I think it's failing to meet, again, the aspirations of the Triple CS on what climate services could be.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great answer. I have a list of questions that were submitted before our discussion today that we'll kind of go through. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, to message them to myself or to the School of Cities directly, and we can get those hopefully answered for you. I think I'll start with a question that Georgia submitted before the presentation, which is, how should we understand the overlap, or sort of like the balance that we should be striving for between quantitative and qualitative data in the decision-making process, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And as you kind of noted, and maybe even seen in some of my slides, I do really appreciate, data as well as sort of more artistic and humanities kinds of understandings of the world. I tend to think about this in 2 ways. One is that we can use a variety of approaches, whether it's interdisciplinary collaboration, participatory research methods, design research to kind of critique current models, current data, sort of what are the narratives, what is the understanding of this phenomena that's being produced, in ways that tell us, oh, we might need to collect a different kind of data about this. We might need to sort of weight our models differently. We might need new data standards and so on. So that's kind of like how can we fix the data, the maps, the models themselves to account for things that are important to us that they currently don't. But I think just as we're doing that, we also have to remember, that the map is not the territory, that data always will produce a partial, limited, incomplete perspective of the phenomena for which it's meant to represent. And that requires us to have a much more kind of sophisticated understanding of the role of data, what it's good for, what it's not. People often refer to this as, or will make these kinds of arguments and say, oh, the public needs to sort of have better data literacy. And we have lots of sort of arguments about sort of data literacy and how it's something that needs to be produced in the public. I would argue that experts also need better data literacy. Those of us who are actually producing data also need to improve our data literacy so we can account for some of the limitations and ultimately just have a much more mature conversation as a community and as a society about how and when we're using data and for what.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Another question coming from Anne, who asks, she just says, I would love to learn how you ensure that the work that the TCO is going to be doing is grounded in, influenced by, and informed by on-the-ground experience, especially the experiences of marginalized communities.
Yeah, so this is always a challenge, but I think hopefully you've gotten the idea that it's important to us just through the presentation I've given so far. Theme one, as I've already mentioned, is really a lot of qualitative and design research with communities across the GTA, including marginalized communities, in a way to better understand sort of how what their current climate data practices, to use that term, are, how they're currently using climate information, where it's helping them, where they're struggling. And I think we're gonna really use that to build some of our later work where we get to actually developing new systems. So we're really starting through trying to build collaborations with a variety of communities to understand their needs and letting the design decisions that will guide what we will eventually build kind of stem from there. I'll also say that this will be a kind of continuous process, and if there are folks on this call or that hear this recording that would like to be involved and would like to help us get connected to different communities that we're not already connected to, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I'll ask another question that is actually something that I'm really interested in, although I am very new to GIS, which is that Charlotte asks, how does GIS fit into this conversation? Or maybe how do you envision using GIS in the work that TCO is going to be doing, or through this lens that you're bringing to the quantitative work?
That's great. I mean, I think almost everything about this has a spatial component. My earliest training was as a GIS technician. I worked in GIS and software development for a number of years. And so a lot of the critiques that I'm making and a lot of the examples I use are squarely about opportunities to improve current GIS practices, opportunities to use GIS tools and technologies in ways that more directly align with our values. And we have a number of students that are using GIS in their research. So GIS is a huge part of what we're doing.
Awesome. Maybe just before we get to wrapping up, one final question, which was asked, but if you want to maybe take this in a bit of a more expansive direction and talk about some of the hopes that you have for the future of the TCO's work, even if that is a really far off future, but how do you imagine sort of this work interacting with policy, municipal policy, provincial policy, anything like that? What do you think that the role or the potential for this kind of work in policy implementation might look like? And if you want to use that just to talk about sort of like the imagined future of these projects.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, as you can tell from some of the user communities that we're working with across the GTA on the climate data practices work, there's several. We're working with both local resilience planners that are involved in the Transform TO process, which is about kind of climate mitigation in the region. We're also working with transportation planners to understand how they're currently using climate data. We're working with folks from emergency management and ECCC who are doing risk communication. So some of our direct user groups, the people that we're trying to design for, include government and policymakers. And again, we're starting from a perspective of what are they trying to do? What do they need to know? What are the kinds of information and in what forms do they need it? in ways that will help us to design our work moving forward. But I see, as you can maybe tell, I really like the vision of the Canadian Climate Services Center and the mandate and that they've set forward for themselves. And I think it's actually an inspiring kind of paragraph about sort of helping Canadians understand, the communities in Canada understand how climate change might impact the things that they care about, and some actions they may take as a result of those impacts. But it's a really ambitious vision as well. And how do we do that? How do we kind of meet that gap between what we're currently delivering in climate services and that vision? And again, I do think that we have a huge opportunity with all the expertise across U of T and some of our partners in community and government to really define that, to help solve that question. And so I think if that's as hopeful and ambitious as a vision for the TCO as I could come up with. Is just simply how can we support the Canadian Climate Services Group and other groups like it around the world to really meet that vision.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before we close, I know you had mentioned it earlier towards the end of your presentation, but if you want to just remind everybody who's here how we can all stay up to date on the fantastic work that the TCO is going to be doing and those opportunities to get involved, if you want to just refresh everybody on what those are.
Yeah, let me just go back a couple of slides. So yeah, I think the first thing is we do have a mailing list. It's a Google list. It's not super high traffic, but it does have our meeting announcements, other kinds of news and events and opportunities to stay involved. So if that's interesting, you can email me at sodin@cs.toronto.edu. That's sodin at cs.toronto.edu, and I will add you to that list. We are actively looking for help getting connected to new partners. If you're working on climate change issues in the GTA and would like to be part of the climate data practices research, please let us know. On our email list, we will be announcing sort of opportunities to participate in the summer 2023 workshop that's coming up in just a couple of months, as well as getting involved with the Toronto Climate Summer School. So the starting place is really to email me to get on our email list. And I'll just put my email back up on the screen there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I think everyone that we will be wrapping it up there. Thank you so much to Dr. Sodin, to everyone who came today to share and to talk, ask questions. It was a really great discussion, and I'm so happy to have been able to facilitate it. So thank you again to everyone. Our next seminar for the Knowledge Cafe series is going to be a discussion with Professor Hiba Mustafa on Islamic urban history and the riverine culture of medieval Cairo, which is super exciting. So that will be a month from today on Wednesday, March 15th at noon. For more details and to register, we should have an event posting up fairly soon on the School of Cities website, which I believe has been posted in the chat. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday, and we hope to see you next month at our Knowledge Cafe.
Thank you.